For everyone with an interest in MASH or, more broadly, steatotic liver disease, Surf's Up. Surfing the MASH Tsunami's annual year-end interviews with some of the people who made a difference in the MASLD world in 2023. Season 4, episode 50 plus starts now.
Today on Surfing the MASH Tsunami.
For me, that was a line in the sand. The first side event on MASLD MASH, large representation, whether it was APASL, EASL, people coming in from Brazil and Mexico, all saying the same thing, that WHO needs to address this, because right now we're approaching it bottom up, but we really need the top-down approach. We need strategies, action plans, frameworks that governments commit themselves to.
You were awarded with the Distinguished Scientific Achievement Award by the American Liver Foundation. I think this speaks to itself. So I'm really glad to have you on this journey here. You know, as a clinician, you can reach a single patient and you can make a difference there, but there's a lot more needed.
I'd like to see diabetes action plans mentioning MASLD and MASH, general health plans to talk about improved diet and lifestyle for cardiovascular disease, diabetes, again mentioning MASLD and MASH. It sounds like a broken record, but we're going to need to repeat this many times and more of us to drive that home.
As a momentous year in steatotic liver disease comes to an end, the Surfing the MASH Tsunami team is reviewing the year with some of our favorite guests. Today, hepatology researcher and key opinion leader Jörn Schottenberg and pricing and forecasting guru Roger Green interview American Liver Foundation Distinguished Scientific Achievement Award winner Dr. Jeff Lazarus about his 3 pivotal activities in 2023 on the Surfing the MASH Tsunami podcast.
So this is the first conversation we're recording as part of our end of 2023 wrap-up. And who better to have join us than Jeff Lazarus, who's had quite a year himself. Jeff, how are you today?
I'm great. Thanks so much, Roger. Hi, Jörn.
And Jeff is just a little bit away from me in Manhattan. Jörn is at a hotel in Hamburg. How are you this evening, Jörn?
I'm great. I'm staying away from home. That's a little troublesome. But again, having started a new position, a new place, so energized and then learning a lot of things every day. Very grateful for the opportunity.
Hoping over the course of these wrap-up interviews, you'll tell our gang a little bit about that, since this is the first time we've spoken to you since you've changed positions. And speaking of changing positions, Louise had hoped to join us this evening, but she's moving to a new apartment in London, and her internet box was supposed to be installed today, but it wasn't, so she has nobody to reach us. So she sends her regrets. Jeff, really, when I said who better to start with, I meant that, because it's been, I think, a pretty momentous year. And, you know, if you think about where progress has been made and what's changed in the middle in 2023 in fatty liver disease, you, my friend, have certainly been in the midst of much of it, hey?
Yeah, it's been an amazing year. I think it's an amazing year for the field. I would say I'm one of the few people collaborating with 500 people, but many of them are also collaborating with the other 499. But I think, for me, the big achievement was bringing the field together on a number of issues, including the first research and action agenda, the new nomenclature, which we can talk more or less about, as well as bringing the societies together to collaborate in the Healthy Livers, Healthy Lives Coalition.
So, I mean, one of those would be a lot, frankly.
It's been a lot.
Any one of those would be a lot. And for those who don't know, Jeff also does extensive work in HIV, in hepatitis C, COVID, global population issues. Some of us wonder whether he ever sleeps, but we figure that he just flies around the world so he gets a whole sleep on planes. So if you had to pick one of those 3 achievements as being most emblematic of what's gone right in 2023, which one would you choose? And I understand they're all interconnected, and we'll get to all of them kind of, but where would you start?
I would say, given the degree of support, the degree of agreement on the research and action priorities, the first time the field has set its own agenda. So unlike so many other therapeutic areas, both in liver, like viral hepatitis, so HIV, cancer, diabetes, WHO has played a leading role, and there are frameworks and action plans and even governmental resolutions at the highest level that does reach the liver field a little bit through alcohol-related liver disease. So, I mean, there's some high-level work on alcohol, but around steatotic liver disease in general, and particularly MASLD and MASH, the global bodies have been silent. So in response, the field has taken matters into our own hands and worked together to publish in AASLD's journal Hepatology and EASL's journal the action and the research priorities for the field. Over 400 collaborators, high level of agreement, It didn't address contentious issues like the nomenclature, because this was done just before the agreement to change the name of the definition.
Do you think it would have been different if the nomenclature had been done first, or does this kind of stand on its own legs?
I think it stands on its own legs. The problem would have been when we introduced the topics, when we had those statements in the recommendations, would we have used, MASLD/NAFLD/MAFLD? There would have probably been some tensions around the names, but since we were using NAFLD and NASH, everyone, even those who don't fully support the new name and nomenclature, stayed involved and largely agreed to those priorities to take action and to research around 6 main domains. The domains we identified a few years ago, a smaller group, as key public health issues, and that includes treatment and care, but also models of care, increased awareness, and leadership. You can research leadership, you can research policy. There's a science called political science, but that is very absent in our field of liver disease, liver health, hepatology.
So what were the keys to getting such widespread involvement?
We threw the net wide. I think a certain degree of legitimacy has been established through the series of Wilton Park meetings, where a smaller group was meeting every year and discussing key issues, working together with the Economist Intelligence Unit in regions that don't get as much attention: Latin America, Middle East, parts of Asia. And I think we've tried to just demonstrate that there's goodwill to move the field forward. We have to go beyond the competition in publications or clinical trials and talk about how do we move the whole field forward. And I think by highlighting how far away we are from parity with other non-communicable diseases really rang home for people. When we look at the WHO technical guidance on non-communicable diseases and see diabetes, cancer, and respiratory diseases represented, we don't see liver disease at all. And I think that has mobilized the field to say that has to change. So another big win was the field coming together for leading organizations, and that includes APASL and ALEH, as well as EASL and AASLD, to hold a side event at the World Health Assembly, the highest governing body of the World Health Organization. We had the chair of the executive board, Vesna Pestric from Slovenia. We had the Minister of Health of Brazil, the Minister of Health of Egypt, and representatives from all of these associations, but also from outside our field, because we really need to expand that community of practice. And we met for a couple of hours, and we talked about the importance of WHO addressing this. And for me, that was a line in the sand. The first side event on MASLD-MASH, large representation, whether it was APASL, EASL, people coming in from Brazil and Mexico, all saying the same thing, that WHO needs to address this, because right now we're approaching it bottom up, which is all of us, and that includes you, Roger, and it includes Jörn, it includes everyone, working in the field, but we really need the top-down approach. We need strategies, action plans, frameworks that governments commit themselves to.
I think your point is you need both, right? It's interesting you mentioned WHO, because when I quote you, which I do frequently on this podcast and in fact in life, the 2 quotes I use most frequently are your one about the WHO document on metabolic disease, where the only time they mentioned the liver was to use the word deliver. And that's not as in to get the liver out of the body, that's as in deliverance. And the second one is your comment the first time you came on this podcast that this is too big, hepatology can't do this one alone. It seems to me that in what you've just described are elements of both of those, eh?
Absolutely. I was looking at an HIV publication yesterday from the UK aligning with global priorities. And of course, I searched for the word liver. There were 11 instances of deliver, and they were delivering on diabetes and HIV care and all kinds of things, but not what's important to people living with HIV, which is multimorbidity. And that includes, among other things, liver disease, and particularly MASLD and MASH, biohepatitis as well. And I'm not saying we need extra attention or calling for MASH exceptionalism. I'm just looking for parity along with other major NCDs.
So this may sound self-evident, but I can think of 8 different ones. What would you see as the 1 or 2 most obvious, tangible benefits of achieving parity?
Well, we would have government commitment, and we would massively raise awareness. We'd raise awareness at the general population and at the at-risk population level among healthcare providers, from primary care to endocrinology, hopefully also cardiovascular disease. And we had the Heart Association at our side event in Geneva. I think that was almost a first. So we would raise that awareness, and we'd raise it among the political leaders. So one of the projects I'm working on for 2024 with Zohair Younasi, Alina Allen, Henry Mark, Jörn, and others is an investment framework where we're looking at the cost of inaction. And so policymakers, and there have been economic studies, including led by Dr. Younasi, led by Jörn, but we really want to show what happens when you don't address this and actually what happens when you do address it and show the longer term cost savings. Up front, there'll be costs, but people tell me, well, it's expensive to address. Well, many therapeutic areas are expensive to address, so why are we not doing this? And I actually think we're doing a lot to address it without recognizing it and taking credit. I mean, endocrinologists, hepatologists are addressing diabetes, GPs are addressing obesity and sometimes also diabetes. So metabolic syndrome is being addressed, but it's so interesting. And I think, your listeners should think when they see documents from adjacent fields, just do a quick search for NAFLD or NASH or MASLD or MASH, or just go to the liver and it's glaringly absent. And one wonders, why would that be the case? Sometimes there'll be 37 mentions of diabetes in a general NCD document and nothing about the bidirectional relationship with fat in your liver.
One of the questions on the very, very short briefing document was what in the ecosystem has not done as well this year as you would have hoped. And I'm inferring that if we're still seeing documents that make no mention of liver disease, that is something that might not be going as well as we would hope, maybe because we have far more effort to put in front of it because of the initiatives you talked about, but that's an area where we can hope to do better, or we should ask more of ourselves and of the society at large. That's just my reaction.
Yeah, so I think what's not going as well as I'd like to see it, when I talk about our ecosystem, some people might think hepatology, but I am talking about all the most common comorbidities. So I'd like to see diabetes action plans mentioning MASLD and MASH, general health plans that talk about improved diet and lifestyle for cardiovascular disease, diabetes, again, mentioning MASLD and MASH. It sounds like a broken record, but we're going to need to repeat this many times and more of us to drive that home. The other thing is when I talk to people about where they get their research funds, there are public funds, and we have a very large project that Jörn and I are involved in. We're about to launch in March. And it's a 30 million euro project, so it's not a small project and has many industry partners, many academic and medical partners. But in general, and again, compared to other fields, there's not even close to parity, especially when we look at public funding. So when we look at NIH funds and the particular institute that handles digestive disease and kidney, there's some liver funding, but there's not a lot for the field. And I noticed that many of my colleagues, particularly in clinical colleagues, don't really think about the public funds and turn to industry. That will need to change. It's interesting that the NIH still has on their website that they'll be prioritizing funding applications for AIDS, but make nary a call for addressing MASH. So do I think we should be addressing AIDS? Of course I do. I've been an AIDS researcher and advocate since being on the streets in the 1980s when no one was really doing anything. But, is it a priority issue for the NIH given everything else that's going on? I'm not so sure. I would need to be convinced.
One of the things I know Jörn's worked on a lot in the past year is simply going to gastroenterology and endocrinology meetings and really and cardiology and trying to talk to a broader field of specialists about where the interconnections are.
Listening to Jeff again, I really appreciate cooperating with him. He's done a great job in highlighting the public health need and helping us physicians using the tools and the language of public health to move fatty liver disease into the realm where we got to start talking with regulators and politicians. And rightfully so, Jeff, congratulations again. You were awarded with the Distinguished Scientific Achievement Award by the American Liver Foundation. I think this speaks to itself. So I'm really glad to have you on this journey here. As a clinician, you can reach a single patient and you can make a difference there, but there's a lot more needed. And I mean, the shortcoming of funding that you're addressing from systematic funds is bothersome because then other researchers won't go into that area. You need young researchers venturing in the area. So the big project, the EU funding you mentioned is a good step in the right direction, but I think we got to do more and better. And again, your work's been incremental, helpful in that.
Thanks, Jörn. I think, with this award and what I said at the ceremony, I think you were there. There were a lot of people there and it was incredibly exciting. And I'm very grateful to ALF. This marked a change in the field. So I'm not a basic or clinical researcher. Of course, I do clinical epidemiology, engaged with models of care in clinical settings, but I'm not a clinician or a basic researcher. And so to win the award and show the field that this kind of research, the policy research, the public health research is valuable and important was frankly just incredible. I was actually standing in this office and when they called, I thought they were letting me down gently and I was thinking, I'm just happy to be nominated. It was really one of those moments where I was like, I can't believe it. And I really did not expect this to happen. I was just happy to be nominated and I'm happy to show that emotion because it's still hard to believe. But, our work is reaching the leading journals. This week, we had the HEPA Health report on minimum unit pricing and other initiatives to address alcohol, showing, real research. We published just a few hours ago in Communications Medicine, a new Nature journal, about our work on hepatitis B among migrants in the community. And I mentioned that because, that's an EU-funded project that started as investigator-initiated research. It turned into a liver cancer prevention project. Now we've we've been loaned fibroscans to bring them into the community, and we will start addressing the person and their liver rather than just this particular virus. We will look for the virus, but we will also look for fibrosis and figure out why they have fibrosis. I think that's where the field needs to be moving, thinking about how we address fibrosis and really liver health more holistically.
So Jeff and Jorn, this is a bit of an off-the-wall question. I just kind of got it listening to you, but I hope it's helpful. One of the things that strikes me about having public funding is that when all your funding comes out of private sector imperatives are about comfort with certain kinds of risk and no comfort with other kinds of risk, right? So I'll risk on a molecule. I don't think it's going to work, but there are all kinds of things I won't bet on. And I think that actually shifts the pattern, both for drug development and for how we look at the disease and how we look at bringing knowledge about the disease into light. I'm wondering if that's similar to what you're observing here, or if not, where other than simply having more sources of money, does the public health money give us benefits that private funding or corporate funding or investor funding doesn't?
So we're incredibly grateful for any funding we receive. And so we went into the community looking for hepatitis B. That was what this company wanted to fund. We said when people are testing negative and we see that they're not vaccinated, we'd like to vaccinate them. And it was like, well, that's not a part of the project and it wasn't part of the funding. So we were able to get government funds to get the vaccines and bring them to the community. Then we said we'd actually like to fibroscan them because they're raising issues. They're saying we do know there's more going on. We're concerned about, they said, hypertension and diabetes. We said, what about MASLD and MASH? So we took their blood pressure and now we can go in with the fibroscan. And that's thanks to support from EchoSense. And EchoSense has a strategic partnership with Novo Nordisk. But again, we're fighting for the public health issues. Sometimes we can convince the companies to expand, but it makes sense. I mean, they're private companies. They have their particular interests. And when they do well, like we saw in viral hepatitis, you can start to do a lot more. So suddenly Gilead, AbbVie, MSD, leaders in viral hepatitis C treatment started funding harm reduction, new models of care, looking into it. We have a great project funded by them, by Gilead, on in addiction services in the Balearic Islands. So they can do more when they see those benefits. But right now we're in such an early stage with the MASH-specific molecules that it's harder to get funding for the public health and even the policy aspects. Not impossible, but more challenging.
Yeah, I agree, Jeff. And again, the broader picture, moving into the population or the neighborhood as you're doing. I mean, in the NASH field, I'd like to go to schools, start educating students about healthy cooking and eating. I think those type of projects will eventually become available. Somebody to fund preventive programs, some aspects if we have therapies approved. On the other side, it's a public responsibility. It's almost like, in the US, you would say we don't spend money on that. But I think in Europe, you have some themes where you stress prevention to a higher degree. And there's some government programs to address this and actually go to schools and educate. I think that's important.
Jorn, you mentioned that as Jeff talks about broadening the aperture out so that we're not just talking hepatologists, but other specialists. I'm mindful of all the meetings you've been going to over the past year, designed pretty much specifically to do that, or you playing a role of representing hepatology and really fatty liver, steatotic liver disease into other specialties and why it matters. I'm wondering how you see that kind of thing aligning with what Jeff is talking about.
Yeah, you're addressing the intersectoral cooperation among different disciplines, and it's been slow, I would say, but there's clearly stronger interest. The meeting I've been running with Jeff in Barcelona, talking about the interdisciplinary pathways of care for steatotic liver disease is a very good example. And in the beginning, we did get all the experts in liver disease in the room, but then a Spanish primary care physician and endocrinologist joined, and the word spread a little bit. The question is always, what can I do? If I'm not treating the liver, not targeting the liver, if I'm an endocrinologist, why should I know about the liver? And I think with continuous medical education, with training some people in the field, going back to their peer group, training them about liver disease, we're making slow progress here. The approval of a drug will make a tremendous difference from funds that become available, from interest from different groups. But I think we've started and the connections are there. And moving forward, I'm much more optimistic that we get a broader uptake.
Jeff, how does what Jorn just described connect with what you're doing, or are they kind of on parallel tracks that will converge at some point, but not yet?
Well, what Jorn mentioned first about engaging at schools, it was really nice to see EASL at the Vienna Congress launching, or at least running a school program. I mean, we have to start early, and I think we underestimate. It sounds a little cliche, like start in school, start with young people. But I mean, look at the climate and the environment movement. Look at kids who are learning about healthy eating, and we always hear stories, often anecdotal, about going home to their parents and saying we need, healthier food. So I do believe in that starting early. It's too late to start later, but we're also facing, strong social determinants of health, structural determinants of health, commercial determinants of health. I'm trying trying to launch a project with food substitutes in Harlem, in East Harlem in New York City. And, a lot of people eat a lot of white rice. So I've been going to the food stores thinking, well, they may think or know that it's healthier, but what does it cost? Well, what do you think it costs, Roger or Jörn? Well, healthier rice, like basmati rice.
If I think about my supermarket, I'm going to say 3 to 4 times as much.
Bingo. Triple. So I was like, well,
who does the food shopping in my household, by the way? You just learned the answer to that question. Yeah, go ahead.
How do we change that, structurally and individually when it's triple the price? So we face these huge challenges. So even when people know and they get nudged and we talk about behavioral change, this is a societal issue and there are things being done, but very slowly.
So because life is a fractal, let me toss something out and see what you think. Generic drugs are cheaper because nobody markets them. By the same token, processed white rice can basically be white labeled, black labeled, or non-labeled. But once you get to basmati or more specialized rice brands, you get corporations that have marketing expenses and branding expenses and a whole bunch of things that don't need to be in the mix. I'm wondering if there's a way to create, this is way afield of anything we're talking about, but should we be talking about how do you create unbranded healthy foods?
That's a great discussion. There are people, who specialize in food and urban food policy who know a lot more about this. But the thing is if a hepatologist says you need to exercise more and you need to eat better, and they may even go as far as to give them some tips or link them to a dietitian or a nutrition or a community-based organization, as is done through social prescribing, those people will face real challenges. And that's why they come back. One of the reasons they come back and say, well, I wasn't able to do that. The parks aren't safe. The NIH is funding a program right now through the City University of New York, a $7 million project to improve the quality of New York's parks, recognizing this issue. They didn't mention MASLD or MASH specifically, but we'll take the win with getting the parks to be better places to exercise. There are, websites and voucher programs that go to healthy websites and get a little more for your money if you choose the healthier option. But these are, Band-Aid solutions to a major societal issue.
Let's step out of this and into the other accomplishments. I wanted to ask briefly, actually, about nomenclature. It seems that's had a banner year. Certainly, I thought the event at AASLD closed most of the issues that I saw as potential impediments to the commercial value of implementing a different nomenclature. How is that going? And do you envision that having a practical play out on the other things that you're working on? And if so, how so?
It's going phenomenally. The papers published by ALEH in Latin America, AASLD and EASL are really making the rounds. We're seeing them well cited, discussed at all the conferences, not just the AASLD meeting this year and last year in EASL, but around the world. And people are realizing that this is a great way to expand the community of practice, engage more people, and focus on metabolic dysfunction associated steatotic liver disease. So thinking, again, much more holistically. Not everyone is on board with the name change. There's been discussions about, should we just call it MASLD/MAFLD? I don't get to decide, but I'm pretty flexible on that. One of the big challenges is changing ICD, the International Classification of Diseases, because we need to be united around this name change. Hannes Hagstrom and a large group of us who were involved in the research and action priorities will be publishing soon a proposal on what it looks like. And in short, our proposal, as has been already mentioned at AASLD, will be to keep the same coding, to not overcomplicate it. There's plenty of studies showing the incredible overlap, and sometimes that small percentage of difference is more attributable to coding issues than real differences.
So going back to fractal geometry again, I'm not sure it matters from my point of view. Look, if there are 6 basic kinds of harbors in the world, every harbor falls into one of 6 basic definitions. Now, if you worry about the small error margins at the fringe, you miss the picture. So if you've got 98% overlap, I don't think I'm going to worry about what the other 2 are. I'm going to call that fractal geometry, and I'm going to say, okay, I'm done. I don't know how one brings that kind of vision into a discussion like this. But
I think the field has pretty much agreed on that. There's so many studies, whether it's the NHANES database or different cohorts around the world, from Taiwan to Spain and Germany and so on. It's more an issue around, are we going to say fatty in the name, or are we going to say steatotic? Because we know in the reality, Jörn, you can comment, well, you're speaking in German, of course, but at least among our American colleagues, it's hard to explain MASLD without saying you have excess fat in the liver. But it is nice for them to come home and say, I have a liver disease called MASLD. This is what I need.
Yeah, I was just going to comment on that because I've been doing some educational activities more recently. And again, the physicians I talk to, that term term, they're not as deep in the field as I am. They're sometimes gastros and been working with liver disease, metabolic liver disease from time. It's very logical. There's no pushback. I think it's very self-explanatory to physicians. So my feeling is this is being accepted, and moving forward, we're just going to use it. It's been agreed on.
And I think Jeff's point about what a doctor says to a patient is parallel to that. Tony Vigliotti, who will be in our next set of interviews, makes the comment that if you have a heart attack, your doctor writes up what you have as myocardial infarction and says you had a heart attack. So by the same token, doctors are going to communicate with patients that have fat on their liver. You really can't not do that. But that might not be the most important element in terms of how do you define the disease after the professional community.
Yep, I totally agree. So I think in a sense, we can move on. I've already seen from Mayo Clinic to Mount Sinai to centers around the world adopting the new name in the names of their clinics. We see it in the article. We see it in our own meeting with Jörn. Innovations in NAFLD care will be the innovations in SLD care think tank, and that's fine. People will ask what SLD is, and we start the conversation.
So, Jeff, as we're getting ready to head into our next conversation, in fact, Mike has just shown up. Just on wrapping up, 2024, in your space in the ecosystem, what are you hoping to see happen?
So, well, it's fitting that Mike comes because I was just on the summit that the Fatty Liver Alliance held, focusing on PCPs, and I think that's our frontier. I mean, we need to prioritize endocrinology and people living with type 2 diabetes, but we need to be engaging more with the primary care physicians, showing them that there's simple, non-invasive tests to use. So one of our projects, which echoes the earlier project we led on biohepatitis called Find the Missing Millions, will be around doubling the diagnosis. So over the next 4 years, how do we double the numbers, particularly those with F2 MASH? So we're doing some modeling work. We're going to be engaging with experts around the world to discuss how do we start to increase. And I think that works for a number of reasons. So it's important in terms of if treatment is approved. We have these people who need treatment identified, but it also raises awareness that if you are an F0 or F1, good for you, and there's things you can do to hopefully never become an F2 or an F3 and have advanced fibrosis. So I'm a fan of early identification of disease, early identification of risk factors, and addressing them as early as possible.
Sounds wise. Jörn, closing questions?
Very powerful message, and again, empowering the patient. I think this is going to lead over in the next conversation we're having. I know Jeff is always in a tight schedule, so it's great seeing you, my friend, and we'll follow up.
Yeah, and Jeff, I'm reflecting on exactly how far what you've worked on has come since the first time you were with us 2.5 years ago. You've moved a couple of mountains, my friend. Not small ones either.
Well, thank you, Roger. And I think being on this podcast, Mike's podcast, the CUNY podcast, and so many people have been so supportive. I mean, this is not a one-man show. This is a huge team, some of whom, not many, sit with me in the office, and then everyone else, on this podcast, but around the world, and they know who they are. And we've tried to be as inclusive as possible to push the field forward. And I think we're seeing a difference in 2023, marked a line in the sand, and I can't wait for 2024. I think there's so much to do, and I look forward to doing it and doing it with all of you. So thank you.
Well, we're looking forward to covering Barcelona and having you with us a couple of times during the year, and maybe even me getting to Barcelona this year. We'll see. Thank you so much for your time. Have a great holiday season to the degree you get to enjoy it, and happy 2024. Okay. Thanks, Jeff. Bye-bye now.
And now for the Season 4 End-of-Year Episodes Business Report.
Slava Ukraini, Heroyam Slava, glory to Ukraine, glory to heroes, and also Am Yisrael Chai, the people of Israel live. The last time I recorded a business section for this podcast, the U.S. Congress was delaying getting badly needed aid to Ukraine. The world was decrying the death of Palestinian civilians, while most were forgetting, and even worse, some were celebrating, the horrible rapes, beheadings, and other beastly crimes Hamas committed on innocent Israelis October 7th that precipitated the Israeli military action. I'd love to say that 3 weeks later, things have changed for the better, and there were days of hope in the Middle East during the Israel-Hamas ceasefire. But sadly, little is meaningfully improved. As we come to this holiday season, let's hope the Ukrainian military maintains and perseveres through the coming winter, and that we can find a solution in the Middle East that preserves an Israel that does not have to fear its neighbors and allows a Palestinian people who live next to them to find peace and prosperity and pursue a better quality of life for their families and themselves. Slava Ukraini, Am Yisrael Chai.
Congratulations, Jörn, and welcome back.
Last time we met, it was too soon to announce Professor Schottenberg's promotion to department head at the medical school in Saarland. Well, that's official now. Jörn has assumed his new responsibilities, and he will be with us on a more or less regular basis going forward. We may need to work a bit on how to improve his internet speed and reliability when staying overnight in Hamburg. I'm sure we'll work that out.
Hey, Spotify, thanks for the good news.
Last week, we received from Spotify their wrap-up numbers from 2023. What these numbers told us was that we had more growth this year than we had anticipated. 50% more listeners, 11% more streams, 72% of people listening doing so for the first time, and if we extrapolate up from Spotify's share of our entire listener pool, 3,000 listeners who rate us in their top 10 podcasts, 2,000 rating us in their top 5, and 750 rating us their overall top. Those are bigger numbers than we thought we had, and we're excited to know that so many people are gaining benefit from this podcast.
You will see new graphics and a new email address when we all return in 2024.
In the interest of efficiency and recognition of Eric's increasingly demanding schedule, we decided to execute the entire graphic and website cutover to MASH Tsunami. All will be fixed when we come back in the beginning of the new year.
The vault is closed for 2023.
Historically, we've included neither Vault conversations nor business sections during the year-end interview series. No more Vault this year as well, but there are a few business section comments I want to share. These may change during the interview week or not. If they change, we'll let you know. And that's it for the year. I want to thank our team, Jorn, Louise, Jake, Mike, Eric, Steve, for their work throughout the year, and more important, to thank you, the listeners, who stuck with us throughout. We've got more interviews ahead, and after that, we'll be back early in January with a new year of episodes and perhaps some new features as well. Until then, enjoy the holiday, happy 2024, and as always, stay safe and surf on. Bye-bye now.
Have any questions for the surfers? You can send them to surfingnash.com, and we will answer on the podcast or the website.